Hey you, yeah you, I have a question. Why is hemp allowed to contain 0.3% THC? Why 0.3? Why not 0.5? Why not 1%, 2%, 3% more? And maybe the biggest question is, what does that one little number actually cost the hemp industry? Because after more than a decade of breeding, growing, processing, testing, and manufacturing products rich in CBD and other phytocannabinoids, I can tell you 0.3 isn't just a number on a piece of paper. It affects what we breed, it affects what we grow, it affects what we harvest, it affects the genetics that survive. And it may be limiting how much of hemp's natural cannabinoid potential we can ever get the opportunity to explore. Welcome back to Hemp Court. Today's case, the 0.3% THC rule. So where did the zero point 0.3 actually come from? Let's go back to 1976. Canadian botanist Ernest and American botanist Arthur Cronquist published a paper dealing with cannabis taxonomy. They needed a practical way to distinguish between different groups of cannabis plants. And they used 0.3% THC. But here's the part most people never hear. Small and Cronquist wrote that they arbitrarily adopt 0.3% THC as a guide for distinguishing two classes of cannabis. Arbitrary. That's their word. Let's take a look at what they did. They didn't discover that at 0.3%, hemp suddenly became marijuana. They didn't discover the DNA changes. They didn't discover an intoxicating switch hiding somewhere between 0.29 and 0.31%. It was a classification tool. Then, decades later, that number becomes law for the hemp program. The 2014 Farm Bill used 0.3% Delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis as its definition for industrial hemp. The 2018 Farm Bill carried that 0.3% threshold forward. And suddenly, that number, decades later, that was used for classification, becomes one of the most important legal numbers in American hemp agriculture. And this is where we have to separate two completely different conversations, law and biology. Legally, 0.3 matters. Absolutely, believe me. I've lived the consequences. But when it comes to the biology, 0.3 does not create hemp. At 0.31 does not magically create marijuana. Marijuana and hemp are both cannabis. But cannabinoid-rich hemp and drug-style marijuana have been bred and selected toward different cannabinoid profiles. The hemp I've spent my career working with is CBD dominant. Drug-type marijuana is THC dominant. And that distinction starts in the biology of the plant. Genes influence enzymes such as CBDA synthase and THCA synthase. Those enzymes influence which cannabinoid pathways the plant favors. A CBD-dominant plant, aka hemp, favors production of CBDA, which can become CBD through the process called decarboxylation. A THC-dominant plant, aka marijuana, favors production of THCA, which can become THC through decarboxylation. So in the CBD-dominant hemp I grow, THC naturally exists, but it is the non-dominant cannabinoid. And yet, what cannabinoid have we chosen to legally judge the entire hemp plant by? THC. Think about that. You could have a CBD dominant hemp plant producing 10% CBD, and while everybody's staring at 0.3% saying that's the number that tells us what this plant is, no, it tells us extremely important legally. It doesn't tell us the entire biological story. Here's an analogy. Women naturally produce testosterone. Men naturally produce estrogen. Those hormones aren't exclusive to one biological sex. So imagine trying to explain the entire biology of a woman by looking at only her testosterone levels. That number can tell you something, but it doesn't define the entire biological system. And that's my point about THC. Measuring one naturally occurring non-dominant cannabinoid in the CBD-dominant hemp plant doesn't suddenly rewrite the genetics of that plant. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. And this is where things get really important for farmers. You ready? Here it is. The hemp plant doesn't know what Congress wrote. It doesn't know what a certificate of analysis is, and it certainly doesn't have a calculator hanging from one of its branches. The plant follows its genetics and grows. As a cannabinoid-rich hemp matures, its chemistry changes. CBD develops, THC develops, and other phytocannabinoids develop as well. Kentucky now tells growers about this exact problem. The Kentucky Department of Agriculture's own grower orientation says all high CBD strains of hemp will exceed 0.3% THC if allowed to fully mature. So what does Kentucky tell farmers? They have to harvest early to remain legal. Kentucky goes even further. It says it's nearly impossible to grow 10% CBD without going over the legal THC limit. Think about that. We tell breeders, develop better cannabinoid-rich hemp genetics. We tell farmers, grow CBD-rich hemp. We want those plants producing cannabinoids. But then, just when that CBD dominant plant gets really good at exactly what we bred it to do, the government says, stop, harvest it. Why? Because its naturally occurring non-dominant THC might cross 0.3% THC. Apparently, Mother Nature forgot to read the Farm Bill. But this is where the conversation becomes bigger than THC. Because hemp just doesn't produce CBD and THC, it has an entire cannabinoid biosynthetic pathway. One important precursor is CBGA, cannabidiolic acid, often called the mother cannabinoid. From CBGA, different enzymes can lead toward different compounds, including CBDA, THCA, and CBCA. Those later become, through decarboxylation, CBD, THC, and CBC, including CBG. But other minor cannabinoids can be present, like CBDV, THCV, CBL, CBDV, and others. Now, I want to be precise. I'm not saying every cannabinoid rises exactly at the same rate. They don't. Genetics matter, environment matters, maturity matters, harvesting time matters. But cannabinoids profiles absolutely change as flowers develop. So when the law pressures a farmer to harvest cannabinoid-rich hemp early, we should be asking, what else are we leaving on the table? What other CBG genetics might have developed? What CBC? What CBDV? What other unusual cannabinoid ratios? What full spectrum profiles? What breeding lines? What discoveries? Remember, science is still studying many of these minor cannabinoids. There may be opportunities inside the plant we haven't even discovered yet, but you can't study genetics that we've never been allowed to develop. And you definitely can't breed with genetics that no longer exist. And that part's personal to me because I've had hemp destroyed over this number. Beautiful, CBD dominant, cannabinoid rich hemp. Some of the highest quality hemp we've ever produced. Months of work, breeding, planting, growing, feeding, monitoring, testing, gone. But it wasn't only flower. I've also had extremely cannabinoid rich seed and genetics destroyed. And as a breeder, that bothers me even more. Because when you destroy a crop, you lose one crop. But when you destroy a unique seed, you may be destroying generations of plants that will never exist. A seed just isn't a seed. It's genetic information. It's potential. Maybe one of those seeds would have had produced exceptional CBG profile. Maybe CBC, maybe CBDV, maybe an unusual ratio of several cannabinoids. Maybe it would have become apparent to a new full spectrum CBD dominant plant lines. Maybe researchers could have discovered something important in those genetics, but we'll never know because they're gone. Because when you destroy a crop, you lose one crop. When you destroy a unique seed, you may be destroying generations of plants that will never exist. A seed just isn't a seed. It's genetic information. It's potential. Maybe one of those seeds would have produced an exceptional CBG profile, maybe CBC, maybe CBDV, maybe an unusual ratio of several cannabinoids. Maybe it could have become a parent of a full spectrum CBD dominant hemp line. Maybe researchers could have discovered something important from those genetics. We'll never know though, because they're gone. So when we talk about the cost of 0.3%, don't measure it only in acres. Don't measure it only in pounds of flour. And don't measure it only in dollars. Measure it in genetic diversity, breeding opportunities, research opportunities, plants that were never grown, crosses that were never made, and cannabinoid profiles that never had the opportunity to exist. How much opportunity have we burned along with those plants? But there's another chapter to this story. And this one may even be crazier. After the 2018 Farm Bill, CBD hemp exploded. Farmers across America planted huge amounts of hemp specifically for cannabinoid extraction. Everybody thought CBD was the next gold rush. Then supply outran demand. The market became flooded with CBD and low-quality cannabinoid biomass. And I want to be accurate here. I'm talking primarily about traditional fiber hemp that was used. Fiber hemp's grown for stalk and fiber. It easily adheres to the 0.3 THC because it contains about 3 to 4% CBD. I'm talking primarily about traditional fiber hemp. Fiber hemp was grown for stalk and fiber. It easily adheres to the 0.3 THC because it contains low amounts of CBD, 3 to 4%. I'm talking about hemp specifically grown for fiber, was ground and converted into biomass. CBD extract, and eventually inexpensive CBD isolate. And then somebody looked at all that CBD and said, you know what else we can do with this? take that non-intoxicating CBD, put it through chemical conversion, and manufacture intoxicating cannabinoids such as delta-8 THC. Think about the irony of that. We created an agricultural system where a farmer growing naturally CBD dominant hemp worries about producing a few hundredths of a percent too much natural THC. Meanwhile, the enormous CBD supply created by the hemp boom became an inexpensive chemical feedstock that could be converted into intoxicating THC cannabinoids. Let that sink in. The natural plant is being judged at 0.3% THC, but somebody can take kilograms of CBD isolate into a laboratory and chemically turn that CBD into intoxicating cannabinoids. And this isn't speculation. The FDA itself says concentrated delta-8 THC products are typically manufactured from hemp-derived CBD because delta-8 occurs naturally in the plants only in very small amounts. Even congressional testimony has discussed how the collapse of the CBD market contributed to businesses chemically converting excess CBD biomass into intoxicating compounds. So think about the unintended consequence. We tightly constrain what Mother Nature was allowed to produce naturally, while an oversupply of CBD helped create the raw material for an entirely new laboratory-made intoxicating cannabinoid industry. That's backwards to me, because that was never the hemp industry I got into. And here's where hemp myth court gets even more ridiculous. Kentucky is incredibly serious about THC when Mother Nature produces it naturally in a CBD-dominant field. A few hundredths of a percent too much, and hey, that's a problem. The farmer may have to remediate his crop and under certain circumstances, destroy it. But Kentucky's hemp-derived cannabinoid regulations also specifically provide permitted facilities to perform cannabinoid conversion, catalyzation, hydrogenation, and other refinement processes. Delta-8 THC is specifically recognized in that regulatory system. So let me make sure I understand this. I grow a naturally CBD-dominant hemp plant. Mother Nature lets it mature, and its non-dominant THC slightly goes too high, and that's a problem. But take the CBD produced by hemp, bring it into a laboratory, chemically convert it into intoxicating THC, and now here's the paperwork, everything's fine. The plant gets a ruler and the chemistry gets a permit. And this is one of my biggest problems with what's happened to the hemp industry. I got into hemp to grow hemp, CBD dominant genetics, real plants, natural occurring cannabinoids. I wanted to breed those plants, grow them, understand their chemistry, extract them, and preserve the naturally occurring compound profile. In a full spectrum hemp extract, CBD, CBDA, CBG, CBC, CBN, naturally occurring trace THC, terpenes, and the broader chemistry those genetics naturally produce that we've talked about. I did not get into hemp because I wanted CBD to become some cheap chemical feedstock for manufacturing intoxicating THC products in the laboratory. Those are fundamentally different philosophies. So let's go back to the original question. What does 0.3 actually tell us? Legally, a lot. It matters tremendously. Believe me, I've lost crops and genetics because of it. But when it comes to the biology, it's not a magic switch. Take two CBD dominant hemp plants from the same breeding line. One tests at 0.2% THC, the other tests at 0.31% THC. Did the second plant suddenly rewrite its DNA? No. Did the ancestry change? No. Did CBD stop being the dominant cannabinoid? No. Did it suddenly transform into a THC dominant marijuana plant? No. The laboratory number crossed a legal line. The genetics didn't. And that distinction matters because when we build an entire agricultural industry around one decimal point, we affect much more than THC. We affect which genetics survive, which plants breeders select, when farmers harvest, which cannabinoid profiles are commercially possible, which research gets conducted, and potentially how much of hemp's natural cannabinoid diversity we get a chance to understand. Meanwhile, the CBD market became oversupplied. CBD became cheap feedstock, and part of the industry learned how to manufacture intoxicating cannabinoids from it. Think about that outcome. We may have destroyed valuable natural genetics while creating an economic incentive to manufacture intoxicants from the cannabinoid we were supposedly growing hemp for in the first place. And boy, that seems more than a little backwards. Maybe we should have spent more time developing the plant instead of developing ways to manipulate its cannabinoids after extraction. And let me be clear, and I'm not arguing that people shouldn't have access to intoxicating THC products, but regulating intoxication and preventing a naturally CBD dominant hemp plant from reaching its genetic and cannabinoid potential are not the same thing. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question. Instead of only asking how much THC is in the plant, maybe we should also be asking, what is the plant genetically bred to produce? Is it CBD dominant? Is it THC dominant? What pathways do the genetics favor? What does its entire cannabinoid profile look like? What genetics are worth preserving? And what might those genetics become if we actually give breeders the opportunity to find out? Because 0.3 may be one of the most important numbers in hemp legally, but it was never Mother Nature's number. And after watching crops destroyed, after watching valuable seed and genetics destroyed, after watching farmers pressured to harvest cannabinoid-rich hemp before full maturity, and then watching excess CBD become feedstock for laboratory-made intoxicating cannabinoids, I think we have to ask, did 0.3% actually protect the hemp plant? Or did it help push the industry in the exactly wrong direction? How much opportunity have we already burned with the plants? The law says stop at 0.3%. The hemp plant says, I'm not finished growing yet. And now you know the rest of the story. Hemp Myth Court adjourned. If you found this case interesting, subscribe to the channel because the cannabis industry, hemp and marijuana, is filled with things we've repeated for years. And Hemp Myth Court is going to separate the law, the folklore, the marketing, and the laboratory from the actual plant science. Thank you for watching.